Hello, everyone, and welcome to SIGGRAPH 2023 here at the Maxon booth. I'm Matthias, a.k.a. Major VFX on all the socials, here accompanied by some world-renowned, amazing artists showcasing Maxon 1 and their workflow and how they bring their creativity to life. Next to me is longtime friend, longtime presenter, has done some of the most amazing presentations. You've seen his work through different sports graphics, commercial graphics, sci-fi. We all know and love Arturo Wong. Big round of applause for Arturo.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Maxon, for having me here one more time at SIGGRAPH 2023. Like you said, my name is Arturo Wong. I am a senior motion designer, now proudly owner of Delirium Studios, recently formed, based here in Los Angeles, California. And for the past over a decade now, I've been specializing on motion graphics, VFX, and character animation. But before I get into what I'm going to be presenting today, let me show you a little bit of what I do and where you can find me. So without further ado, here is my demo reel. There we go. A little bit of like all the projects that I've done in the past. Like I said, you guys can find me here on my website directly, arturowong.com. Unfortunately, right now for the studio, we're still in work in progress. Since I recently said it's been recently formed. But here you will find most of my professional work, as well as how to contact me directly if you guys have any questions, inquiries, anything. Also, as well as LinkedIn, feel free to reach out. Instagram, you will see some of my personal work, as well as some of my professional work as well. So yes, don't be a stranger, please reach out. But for today, I want to be talking about a recent project that I had the pleasure to work with the LA Clippers. The creative director for this project was Tariq Awad. And this is what I'm going to be focusing for today. This is the whole graphics package that I did for their matchup events in Arena. It was a quick turnaround, a lot of stuff going on. Super happy and glad that I was able to participate on this project. And for today, the first thing that I want to talk about is we're going to be breaking this project apart. Going to be mentioning certain effects and workflows that I believe that have not been utilized as much, but for me they're so powerful. Like for instance, this part right here on the background, the stadium, how it's building up, the simulation of the net with the ball, combining animation and simulation to have more control over the end result. So let's just go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and let's get this party started. Here I have the stadium that I grabbed from TurboSquid. Just gonna quickly go into it just to show you guys what I'm gonna be working with. As you guys can see, there is a lot of geometry going on here. So if I were to apply any effects right now, you guys already know it's gonna slow down my computer, the whole process, it's gonna be delayed. So what I like to do is, I like to work with proxies. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna create just another primitive, another box here with some segments that I can, that will represent the effect that I'm gonna be applying to the stadium later on. So for that, I'm gonna delete all this, let's start from scratch. I'm going to press Shift-C. I'm going to look for poly effects. I'm going to drag it under a child so that it can be affected. And while having it selected, I'm going to go to my effectors here. and add a plane effector. Now, this effect is going to be a reveal effect, and we're going to be revealing the stadium. So what I want to do right now is go into my parameters and enable my scale, go to uniform, and set this scale to -1. So now that I have the effect having placed into my scene, and it's affecting my cube or my proxy, I'm going to be controlling how am I going to be revealing this with a linear fill. I'm going to change the parameters here of the direction, as well as the scale of my linear fill, so that I can have a more subtle reveal. Okay, let's go ahead and animate this. I'm going to create my first keyframe. Let's go to 60 frames. Let's move it across. I created a keyframe in the wrong object. Let's create the keyframe here on my linear effector. Move this back to 0. And now we can move this effector across my entire stadium or proxy in this case. I'm going to go and right-click on the animated object that I have here selected. Go to my show tracks, expand this a little bit to just see my keyframes. Gonna press on tab. This is my curve editor. As you guys can see right now, I have an ease at the beginning and an ease at the end. So I'm gonna change this interpolation to linear for now. I'm gonna click here to get rid of that. And just gonna press play right now to see what we got. Now we have the reveal going on. It's super subtle, super simple. However, we can still take this a step further. So on my plane effector here, what I like to do is, usually you guys have seen this combination of effects where like you want to break this uniformity of the reveal by adding a noise. So that's what I'm going to do exactly right now. I'm going to set my shader field to, blend to overlay. The shader is going to be a noise. Sorry. Couldn't help it. Okay, and here we're going to be increasing the contrast. And as you can see already, I'm already breaking the uniformity and creating something more interesting than before. Now, the noise shader is a very powerful effect that you guys can add to your projects. It already contains these sliders for animation that if I were to expand my timeline here so that the reveal can be a little bit slower and you guys can see what's happening with that noise effector. You guys can see that now that noise is taking place, it's creating an additional animation on top of my regular, and all of this is being controlled just by one simple animation, which is my linear fill. On top of that, we can go ahead and change any parameters of my plane effector. Since the animation is being triggered by a linear fill, all of these parameters can be changed at any time, and they will be updated one more time. So I'm going to go crazy here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to put this to 500. Now I have a different type of animation. This, again, is entirely up to your project to like what you're looking for. And because PolyFX accept all the effectors in Cinema 4D, we can also apply our good friend, the delay effector, which is so powerful. So, like I said, in my particular scenario, I didn't need to add any of this delay effector, but you guys can see how this can be powerful. I'm going to press NC to get rid of the wireframe in there. But if you're looking for a reveal that is a little bit more techy, something like that, this could work perfectly. Now, next, once I'm happy with the result that I have, all I need to do is just change this poly effect from the cube that I have here to my stadium. I'm going to hide the cube. I'm going to hide this too. And I'm just going to scroll through the time so that you guys can see more or less what's happening. I'm going to enable it here. And you guys can see what's happening. Now that I know that the timing for all the timing that I was working on for the proxy now applies to the stadium. That's a nice way for me to like have real feedback of timing and see more or less what the effect that I'm going to get once I apply that to a heavier mesh. If I go into the stadium, you guys are going to see there's tons and tons of like little polygons revealing itself, moving across the entire scene. And if I were to just work directly on this stadium, it would have taken me a long time. Probably I would have run into some crashes. Totally a mess. But this is the first thing that I ended up working with on the stadium was how to reveal this stadium. We wanted to like create the sense that we were going to be outside and then bringing you into the arena to feel all the emotions in there. Now next, let's go back to the video here. Next I have like, for me was the best part. To work with animation and simulation for me, it's always a go-to. And thinking about like how to animate a basketball going into a hoop, getting a nice simulation for the net, but also controlling that in a way that I can like slow down the camera, art direct it a little bit if you will, and continue it. Having full control of this scene was really a task because we went through like so many types of simulations and animations, but the best combination that I found was to combine both. So here I have a scene already separated. And by the way, you guys can get this hoop from the asset manager here. It's going to press basketball. If I can spell basketball, there we go. Let's download the asset. Anyhow, while this is downloading, this is just a whole rig that it's been already provided to us. We have already basketballs. They're already with their own textures. So everything was for me there to like start just playing around and not having to go around and look for an actual asset that I could use for my project. Okay. Let me see, what do we have here? Downloading asset, 62%. There we go, my first crash. Oh no, there we go. All right, so this is the asset that I ended up using from the asset manager. I went through all the objects that were underneath until eventually I found where this object was, which was just the hoop. That's all I needed for me to start the animation. So after I ended up finding out where it was, isolating it just for the animation purposes, so that at the end of the day, I can bake all this as an Olympic file and then bring it to my master scene. So what I like to do right now is go ahead and start animating this basketball going into the hoop manually. And with that, we're going to just be using the X and Y axis. We're going to go to, I'm going to move my keyframes here since I created it in frame 136. This is going to be very fast, so I'm going to reduce my timeline to probably 90 frames. I'm going to go, at this part of the animation, I don't quite care about the timing. I care more about like the position of the keyframes, and then I can just go back and modify the keyframes going back and forth until I get the timing that I actually want. So I'm going to go ahead and create another keyframe there. As a matter of fact, you can also activate the auto keying option here. I'm moving now to frame 30, moving it a little bit slow so that basically I'm trying to think about, okay, once the ball goes into the net, there's going to be some friction. I want that moment to be epic, so I want to have a little bit of time there and before the ball eventually just falls. Whoop. There we go. Now, what I can do now to refine this animation is to go into my curves. So let's expand this again. I'm going to press tab one more time to go to my curve editor here. What I want at the end, since it's going to be falling, I want the energy to like be, to have this acceleration at the end. And at the beginning, what I want to do now is I want to visualize this curve to have a little bit of an arc. Like so. Now, since the basketball is going to be landing, any landing have this energy until it gets stopped by something, right? So in this case, it's the net. So I'm going to be representing that with my curves here by shortening these tangles, these handles, and making sure that the motion is correct. So if I were to play right now to just test the timing, okay, I'm starting to get something. The hoop goes, it starts to slow down. Now I can spend more time here refining this animation. I can go here and press S to just zoom in into this portion of the animation. As you can see, this is my Y-axis. I'm going to make sure that this is a nice soft landing. And at the end, I'm going to press Control-Shift just to break this tangent and only extend the right side while controlling that the angle is not being changed, like so. Lands and then falls. Perfect. So now that I'm happy with this animation, I can go ahead and start adding all the good stuff, the simulation part. So right now here, when I was trying to dig more into this asset from the asset manager, I realized that they were using a cloner for all the nodes, so that means that they were probably controlled by the vertices. So if I were to like click on any of these vertices and move them around, the node here is moving with it. However, the actual net is not moving with it. So what happened was that I looked at this guy, the sweep, which it was this is actually the net. And what I decided to do, I decided to collapse that into a mesh. So I'm going to middle click on it, and that's going to select all the objects within that object. I'm going to go here to my option, connect objects and delete. I'm going to go to my object mode here. And now it's part of a mesh that is not controlled by anything. However, we can add a mesh deformer. Let's see if I can find it here. Mesh, and now before I press enter, I'm going to hold shift and press enter so that automatically becomes a child of that object. Now the mesh deformer is actually a very powerful mesh deformer that will control the object that you put that effector onto by utilizing the vertices of another object. So that means that you can have a scan, add the mesh deformer, and simulate a proxy, and then bring that proxy to control the high-res object. Now, I'll translate that. Now that I have here my mesh deformer, I can drag here my driver mesh, press initialize, go to my advanced tab here, select surface, and by default, every time that you add a mesh, an object to the cage of the mesh deformer, it will add this display. So we can delete this for now, just so that we can see what's happening. And if I were to move now any vertice, now you guys can see that the node and the net is actually moving with it. And this is what we need. So that all the simulation will be happening within this helper don't activate object that we have here. I'm going to go back to my object mode, create a simulation tag for cloth. Gonna go back to my vertices, select a rectangular selection, and I'm gonna just select the vertices at the top. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pin them so that they're not gonna be moving. If I were to press play right now, as it is, everything is gonna fall because nothing is telling that net to stay in place. So let's do that. Let's go ahead, go back to my point selection here, go to my dresser tab up here, and I'm gonna have this option here says fixed points, press set. You guys can see that the vertices on the top have changed colors to purple. And lastly, I'm gonna add here a collider effect. So we have here a collider. Now, I'm gonna hide this driver mesh for a minute, go back to my object, and just see what we have so far. There we go. So now it's activated. Now we can see that we can start playing with the parameters. Everything is working as it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change some parameters here till I make it easy on the calculations of the computer. I'm going to press Control-D to go to my project options here. I'm going to change the sub-steps probably to 10. Probably reduce the gravity as well, maybe to 800, just to make it a little bit slower. As you can see, it's starting to be a little more bouncy, a little more realistic. You guys can spend all the time in the world to make this as realistic as you want. But this is the major setup. Now, lastly, what I was thinking about it was, what am I going to do with the ball once it goes into it? I can animate a bounce, but then that requires me to spend more time. And we didn't have that time. It was, like I said, it was a quick turnaround. It was just a few days, going back to approvals, back and forth. And I wanted to present something that was like really cool. Like for me, I wanted to like go through like as least amount of reviews as I could. So I wanted to get this part in a way that it was done enough and good enough for me to like move on and utilize that animation on my master scene. So what I ended up doing, it was instead of going full animation, all traditional, I ended up mixing full traditional animation with simulation. So what I did was, I went here to my bullet tags, I had a rigid body. By default, this is going to take over my animation. However, I have an enable option here that I can utilize at any time to tell Cinema 4D when to activate that simulation onto my ball. So I'm going to just scroll through the time, probably the time that starts landing, maybe around here, and now enable that. Create a keyframe. And now let's see what we have. Now we can see that the simulation is taking over. However, the ball is just falling and falling until infinity. So what we need, it's a floor. We're going to hide that floor, and we're going to add a simulation tag here for a collider. There we go. Now, really quickly, I'm going to be messing with this parameters. Probably the bounce, it's a basketball, they tend to bounce a lot. Probably 80 will do. They have a lot of friction. I'm going to go to my simulation tag for the ball as well. I'm going to increase this bounce percentage to 80%. And let's see what we have so far. There we go. We have the bounce. Like I said again, this is the time for you to play around. The setup is already there. All the keyframes are there for you to move around and just alter all these parameters to get the desired effect. Now, the reason why I wanted to present this is because like the more that I was playing with it, the more that I realized how easy it was for me to create different animations with this. So for instance, let me bring back my keyframes here. This is the representation of what's going on my scene. And if I were to move, I'm going to deselect that so it's not distracting. If I were to move, when this simulation is going to take place, now you're going to start getting different type of simulations or animations for your scene. That is, if you want to have a clean shot, you can just move them around. But you guys can see like how powerful a setup like this can be, going back and forth. If you wish to like have your whole rig here, and this is the type of shot that you're looking for, you can go ahead and create another object, use it as a collider. It will be a proxy, of course, of the rig that you have for your net. I can just control and drag this tag onto my cube. And you guys can see now that I have now a quick simulation of the basketball going into the hoop, like in the video. Let's see it one more time. And falls, it keeps bouncing and bouncing. So what I ended up doing, once I was happy with all this, with the simulation and the animation that I was having, I'm going to go back and move my keyframes back to where we were. There we go. That was the animation that I wanted. Once I was happy with it, now it was time for me to bake. And like I said before, what I ended up doing was selecting the basketball first. I wanted to have them separate. Go to my Alembic exporting options here. This is where you will define how many frames you want to, depending on the scene that you have. Because it was a large scene, I wanted to have enough frames for the bottle to for the ball to settle in the floor. So the main option here to remember will be to have the selection only option enable. Once you press OK, it will take you to a place where you want to save it. Save it however you want, ball. Let's go ahead, let's do that. It will be a quick export. And once it's done, then we don't need this object anymore. We can go ahead and go back to wherever you saved that Alembic, bring it back into the scene by holding Control and Shift so that it doesn't open in a different scene. I'm going to press OK. And if I were to press play here, it's the same animation that I was having before. Now let's do the same thing for the net. Now for the net, it will be a little bit different. Since we have two different objects, what I wanted to do is just consolidate that into just one single object, one single alembic. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to create a connect object here. And depending on where you create this connect, wherever this pivot is going to be in your 3D scene, that's going to be the pivot for the object that is going to be baked. So I like to have most of my simulations in the middle of the scene so that they're all easier to position in case I forget where in 3D space that they were. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave my connect object right in the middle of the scene. Select my nuts here. Select my sweep that I have here. Put everything under a child of my connect. I'm going to disable this weld option. I'm going to call this net. And now, what we can do is go to export once again, alembic, selection only. I guess we don't need those many frames for this one, so that it can go a little bit faster. We're gonna do probably just the 90 frames that we have here right now, and press OK, verifying that all selection only is enabled. Call this net, enter. And once it's done, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to bring it back to the scene. At this point, I don't need these objects anymore, so I can disable them so that they're not running on the back, not even the mesh. Perfect. Go back to my folder, grab the net, Control-Shift holding it, drag it into my scene so it's not opening a new scene. And here we go. Now, like I said before, because at the beginning I put the pivot in the middle of the scene, it will match perfectly. And in order for you to do that, you can hold Alt-0 and it will move it right in place. I'm going to hide the net before, and because now this is a baked animation, I have all control in the world to make it slower, create a slow-mo, whatever I want to do for my project. We can increase the speed here to 200. We can make it even slower. This can be animated for you to create that slow-mo moment. Okay. So once this was done, I just brought it back into my master scene, brought it back, and then the next task was to create more options in my scene to bring it to life. There was only one basketball falling at the beginning. There was nothing going around. And the director suggested maybe to have some basketballs also bouncing at the same time, randomly, of course, to create more of that live vibe going on into the scene. So that was done, once again, with a simulation tag, very easily. If I were to go to my next scene here, I'm going to delete these keyframes. Gonna hide everything just for you guys to see. Right there, done. Oh, we're good. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this sphere. Just hide this for now. I'm gonna go to my keyframes here. I'm gonna press here on this P. I'm gonna hold Shift and click on my rotation as well. I'm gonna hold now Control Shift to get rid of all the animation of this object. You can do the same thing by going to Show Tracks, and any keyframes that will appear here, just delete them. So now we have a ball without animation, and we're going to create that simulation really quick. So once again, I'm going to create a floor, hide the floor. While holding Control, I'm going to select the floor and the basketball, right-click, go to my bullet tags, add a rigid body. Cinema recognizes that the floor is the floor, so it's adding a collider body here instead of a rigid body. I'm going to increase the percentage to 80 as it was before. Bouncing here as well. And we're just going to press play. And that's all the animation that I'm going to be using, so 70 frames. All I want to do now is grab this tag, and bake it onto the object. Even though I'm dragging it onto my timeline and they're not showing, they are there. The only difference is that we need to activate an option here says filter animated only, and there they are. I'm going to select my basketball here. Functions, baked object, and I don't want to create a copy. All I need is 80 frames, not negative, but 80. And press OK. Immediately I have my keyframes. I no longer need this tag, no longer need the floor. And now I have my simulation going. Now what I can do now is I'm going to delete all of this and just have that. Now that I have the first bounce, now what I want to do is do some variations. And the first instinct that I will have is to bring it into a cloner. Put it on the grid. Press play, and nothing happens. The reason why is because the cloner is taking over the position, rotation, and scale of this animated object. And even though it has animation, it's being overwritten by the cloner. So what I'm going to do is holding shift, I'm going to create a null and put that sphere inside that null. And if I press play, we should have animation now. Just going to make sure that this is on the floor. Perfect. Now the next thing I wanted to do is add that randomization. And for that, our good friend Random Effector will do the trick. We're going to try not to mess with the y-axis so it doesn't break the plane of the floor. We're going to change some parameters here to randomize it a little more. And we're going to add a time offset to create that variation of the bounce. So if I press play, now we have these balls bouncing at different times just with one single simulation. Now, in my particular animation, this was done later on the timeline, so I needed to offset these guys even farther in the timeline. So what I ended up doing was creating a simple plane effector, only utilizing the time offset here, let's say another 20 frames. But then what I encountered was that now that plane effector was taking over my random effector, and my random, the randomization of my animation was gone. However, we can fix that by just changing the order of my effectors here on my main cloner object. And like so, we have all these animations that you can control just with a couple parameters, one single simulation. We can create more cloners if you want. Go wild. Where's your oyster? I'm hungry. There we go. And that's how I ended up doing the last part of this animation once it's settled. Just to create a little bit more life to it. Okay. So a couple things that I want to talk about this is also how I ended up creating these graphics on the back. Working at ESPN and in broadcast for so many years, we always found out that having these glitch effects always create more attention to the scene that you're creating. Working in sports, it makes even more sense to add even more of that to create that emotion that you're trying to transmit, right? So since everything is supposed to be energetic, flying, this is a matchup, I wanted to also create that sort of feeling. This was going to be presented in arena, so I wanted to make it look very nice, very appealing, but at the same time, so many glitches that will pretty much make you cause to be in rage. I wanted to translate that emotion into those graphics. So that was a quick animation that I ended up doing in After Effects. This is not the font that I ended up using. Unfortunately, I forgot to bring the font that I did, but here you will see more or less what I ended up doing. This is nothing crazy. This is super easy to make. It's a little bit tedious and time consuming, but it's basically just editing. You're just changing colors, bringing them back and forth, and once you're happy with the emotions and the timing that you're having, you're bringing this clip into Cinema 4D as a image sequence and utilize it into your scene for you to create those reflection moments, those moments for you to hype up the crowd. Once you're happy, you send this to render as a image sequence, probably JPEG, and PNGs. And once it's rendered, let's go back to my Cinema 4D. I'll show you the master scene. This is my master scene. If I scroll through the time, you're going to see all the animations that we were talking before. Everything was already brought here to my master scene. Everything was already baked. And what I want to do is show you how that looks in Redshift, which is not that. Render view. There we go. I'm going to change this to fit. Scaling. Let's see, press play. Okay. This was the scene that I ended up rendering from Cinema 4D, and with all the passes that I needed, I brought all of that into After Effects to add more glows to the glitches that I had, mats that I needed for me to composite this stuff, depth of field, all this good stuff that you will see later on in compositing. That's my depth of field, all these mats that I was going to need in order for me to have full control of this, because this was supposed to be a package in which clippers were always going to be on the left and the opponent team was always going to be on the right. So I needed to figure out how am I going to be replacing these logos, replacing the words here, for instance, Lakers, the title, and the graphics behind them without having to re-render this over and over and over again. So what I ended up doing was render the right side white and using that as a mat in After Effects in order for me to change all these graphics. For the logos, I did the exact same thing. I left it blank at the end, blank on the Lakers, and it was later on replaced in comp with all the other teams that they needed to be in there. Really quick, I'm going to just show you how to bring that that texture that we were creating in After Effects into the scene. By the way, this is the whole scene. And if I were to open here my materials, I'm going to keep my, where's my Redshift, render view. I'm going to enable this for now. And if I were to select this panel, this will be this guy. I'm going to double click on the material to open here my material editor. I'm going to dock it down here just so I can have it easier. I'm going to dock this window here on the side. And here we go. This is all the magic for those panels on the back. This was an image that was brought here. I press detect frames. It will calculate all the frames that were there. They were in a loop mode so that they can constantly be playing on the back once it's settled. And they were added to my emission color down here in order for me to create more of that glow at the end. Additionally, I created these simple graphics behind the main logos just to create a little more interest into my frames. And it's another quick effect that you can utilize in After Effects. It's very useful for logos or things like this, for instance, like put things on the background. It's always utilized in sports. And the way that it's done, it's basically, I'll show you this first. It's this animation where the paths of the logo are being trimmed and they're just being they're just looping back and forth. It's very simple animation, like I said before. All you need is your vector file, bring it into After Effects. Once you're in After Effects, you just bring that into your comp, right-click, create shapes from vector layer. I'm going to turn off show layer control so it can be more obvious. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create. First of all, I'm going to get rid of all the color in there. And what I'm going to do is click here on this fill option. Kill all the colors in there. I'm going to add a stroke. I'm going to also add a trim path. And in here, I'm just going to modify this end option a little bit. I'm going to create a quicker expression by holding Alt, clicking on this stopwatch. I'm going to type time times 180 probably. Press 0 to preview it. And this is the animation that I ended up doing to later on bring that into my Cinema 4D as a image sequence and have those looping on the back of each logo, just to create, again, a little bit more of a customizable element there for each team and the main scene. And that's it. Once again, let's see the final result. So it goes in. Since this was a live event, of course, we didn't have any music to add to this video. I had to create also the ribbons, the rings, and the whole graphic package for this event. Super grateful, fun project that I ended up working in. But yes, that was it for my presentation. Once again, my name is Arturo Wong. You can find me on my website, LinkedIn, Instagram. Feel free to reach out at any time. I'm always available.
Great job. Good job. All right, everyone. Arturo Wong. Yeah, that's right. Okay, got Don Allen in the audience. Hello, fellow presenters. So we do have time for questions, luckily. So questions, just go ahead and raise a hand. Don Allen, question.
Bring it.
Okay, so the question is about camera movement and how'd you pull it off?
Okay. I feel like that's one of those things that like you always try to figure out, okay, if you add the keyframes first manually, traditional animation, and later on you start thinking about, okay, but what if we can add a little shake to it, right? So I ended up just, as you can see here, adding a vibrate tag to it. Just for the rotation, you can add it to like position, stuff like that, but it will always give you that more natural, you know, like movement of it. And it's nice because like it just keeps moving. It's not a static camera. It brings more motion to the scene. So, yep.
Do you ever use the motion camera or any of the other cameras, or is this like your go-to technique? And
that's my go-to, because at the beginning when I started, I always started with the vibrate tag, and since then I just fell in love. It's easy to control.
Yep.
So yeah,
okay.
My go-to.
Awesome. Any other questions? So what do you use for rendering?
Okay, so I've worked in the past with Arnold. I've touched Octane a little bit and Redshift. The one that I'm using now and I'm more comfortable with is Redshift. It's a GPU render. And since then, jumping from like old school rendering where like it will utilize CPU and you will have to wait for hours, you find out what computer is available in order for your render to like, you know, come out in time. I decided to like fully switch to Redshift, get a nice graphic card, and then send everything to render, get those renders on point and fast. So, yep.
Any other questions? But what about building out your textures?
That's a good question. Quickly, I want to like actually mention like a couple websites that are great for that. Z0 Textures, I think it's called. This one. These are all PBR textures that are free. And
ambient
everything.
CG.com.
Exactly. That's the one. And there's many. There's, what's the other one? New Haven? No, New Haven. Haven Poly or something like that. There's so many of these websites out there with PBR free materials that you can just bring. Another option that I use is called Substance Painter, which is, it gives you a little bit more control. You can paint in it. But yeah, I will recommend those two to like look into.
Yeah. Free tips, folks. Free tips. Any other questions? Right there.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So the question is, when you're going back and forth with the client, what are you showing them as you progress and communicate?
Okay. So I feel like at the very beginning, the more that you work in the industry and the more that you start dealing with clients, the more you start figuring out, okay, you know what, there's an actual process for this, which is have a still frame, have that approved. Once the still frame is approved, now you can start going into production and start like animating probably a couple frames, something like that, to get the idea of like what the end result is going to be. That will be a preview with no materials, no nothing. It just will be plain just to like focus on the animation. Once that's done and it's approved, we can go ahead and start building the whole scene with materials, the animation, polish it, and have a first view to like the supposed to be end result. And now it's when we can start going back and forth and refining those little things. Everything needs to be controlled so that things don't go out of hand.
All right, any other questions? All right, if you do have other questions, Arturo is going to be at the Dell booth. We have a little demo station with Cinema all set up, so you'll be able to go through and ask any other questions back and forth. But if not, stay tuned. We're going to be back here with our next presenter in just a little bit, and we'll keep the day rolling. So thanks again, Arturo.
Thank you, everyone.